Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Kellee White. I'm a spiritual medium, and I'm also a psychotherapist. And I'm here with my very dear friend.
Hi, I'm Dr. Shirley Impellizzeri, a psychologist.
Wow. And welcome, everybody, to Psychology and the Soul. And we talk about psychology and the soul and spirituality, and it all comes together for this deep conversation. So we really are so thrilled to have everybody here today.
Yeah, for those people who are coming back, welcome back.
Welcome back. And for our new listeners, really welcome. And everybody that's been following us, we're thrilled to have you. And today we're going to talk about something that many people may feel. And it's a subject that Shirley and I are really, we find it very important.
Yeah.
And we're passionate about this one. So we're going to talk about things that maybe we don't have a language for. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it could be that we're going to talk about the parts of you that were shaped by your past. So you'll pay attention to some of the things that may trigger you or may get you thinking. Is what our goal is, right, Shirley? To get people to think, right?
Right.
And so maybe it's not just the parts of you that were shaped by your past, but maybe it's the parts of you that you've learned to adopt or adapt, I should say, and to protect yourself and to survive.
Yeah.
Because whether we realize it or not, we're not just living as who we are today. We're actually living as every version of ourselves that came before. Think about that.
Right. The parts that we need to keep hidden, the parts that we created to adapt. Yeah.
Really important. So today we're going to be talking about inner child work and shadow work.
Yeah.
Very important. And we're not going to talk about it in a surface level way, but we're going to talk about it in a way that will help you understand yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is so key. I mean, in this work and just here as we come, as you always share with us, that we came here to evolve. It's all about understanding ourselves, really understanding who we are and why we are the way we are without judgment, with curiosity.
What makes us tick?
Exactly. In psychology, we understand the self isn't singular. It's made up of different parts, not parts like, that completely dissociated, but different parts of us, like I have a part when I go to work, my psychologist part, my friend part, my mom part. But some of those parts hold pain, and fear or unmet needs. Others develop specifically to protect you from that pain. And when those parts aren't integrated, it causes what we call fragmentation. It can create kind of a fragmentation of ourself, which often shows up as feeling disconnected from yourself or reacting in ways that you don't fully understand.
And we're going to actually be giving an example of fragmentation that will really help you understand this piece that we're talking about.
Yeah,
it will really. I think it'll hit home in a way that you will each have some memories or some understanding of yourself with this example that we're going to give. Mm-hmm. This is where people start asking, and the question really is, why do I feel this way? Mm-hmm. Why do I keep repeating this pattern? If I had a nickel for every time I heard that, why am I repeating this pattern? And why does this situation affect me so deeply? Cheryl, like you might be watching, a show. And why is this affecting me so deeply?
Right.
Or, why is it I heard a story about another family and it's hitting me really hard? People that I don't know. Right?
Yeah. Even things that trigger us. We're out on the street, the clerk says something or looks at us a certain way, and we notice we're having a big reaction. We may not actually react to the person, but we notice it within us. There's a valid reason for that.
Right. And the answer is usually that there's a part of you speaking there that hasn't been heard yet.
Yeah.
So, when people hear the term inner child, they sometimes think it's just about childhood memories. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's what I used to think. I really wasn't sure, Shirley. But it's really deeper than that. Mm-hmm. It's that emotional imprint of your early experiences. So early on, that part of you that still carries those feelings. It's the version of you that learned possibly what love feels like, what safety feels like or not, what rejection feels like or not, again, what love feels like or not. And most importantly, of what you had to become to be accepted in that family of yours.
Right, right. We often see this clinically in patterns like fear of abandonment, need for approval, emotional reactivity, difficulty feeling safe or secure, or even creating a chaotic life as an adult.
Yeah.
A chaotic environment without understanding why. Just like you, if I had a penny for every time, I asked, did you grow up in a chaotic environment? The answer almost always is yes. And so the brain likes what's familiar. It'll recreate without awareness of it. It'll recreate the same type of energy or the same environment that we had growing up, So, and it's really important to say that they're not flaws. They're adaptations.
To survive.
Right. They're a way to feel safe. If I grew up in a chaotic childhood, being in a calm environment doesn't feel safe.
Isn't that interesting? Just the opposite.
Just the opposite, exactly. And we think that automatically, I guess we turn 21, we become adults and everything shifts. Without awareness, I've always said, age does not heal trauma.
Oh, that's the truth.
We have to be aware of it. We have to do the work so the unconscious becomes conscious. And then we can realize, wow, I've recreated this chaotic environment because that's what I'm used to. I don't want that anymore.
That often will happen in a marriage or in a relationship.
Oh, absolutely.
And, you're picking from your chaos and they are picking from their chaos.
Right. And the two... I've always said it's a match made in heaven that'll take you through the bowels of hell.
Absolutely, Shirley. I mean, spiritually, that's exactly what happens. It is a match made over there. We figure it out. Why do we do this? We need the experience to wake us up, to be able to set boundaries, to know who we are. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why this happens, but we tend, if we come from chaos, which most people do, then we tend to pick chaos or drama or any of the above. And in fact, I remember, Shirley, when I moved to the farm, I was like, what is this odd feeling? Like I couldn't quite understand this odd feeling coming from a real chaos environment and living in Los Angeles. But I also come from chaos. And I was like, what is this odd? It took me a really long time to slow my nervous system down. So I understood it was calm. It was what I was feeling. It was the oddest thing I had ever felt. What is that odd feeling? It's calm.
Yeah. What? And it can be very loud.
Oh, you bet. Yeah. You bet. That's what they say in the Midwest. Your inner child didn't create these patterns to hurt you, by the way, at all. These were created to protect you. So you have to look at it this way. So, and what we're saying is there's no judgment. We all figure some way to cope, in our family dynamic. And that changes everything because now we're not looking at ourselves as broken. So I want you to remember that any of your coping skills, you did that to protect yourself. Okay. Again, so we're not looking at anybody, nobody's broken. We're looking at this. We're going to call this instead, which I love this term, Shirley, is looking at ourselves as whatever our coping style was, as brilliantly adaptive.
Oh, absolutely.
Good one. Brilliantly adaptive.
I love that. I mean, the brain is an extraordinary organ and it'll do what it needs to do to survive. And that's just coming from our nature. The species wouldn't have survived. We would have all died off if the brain wasn't so brilliantly adaptive. And of course, unfortunately, many times as we grow up, we realize it's working against us. These adaptations worked as children, but now start to work against us. Right. And so that's an important piece, Once you understand that, you can begin to shift from judgment to compassion. As I've always said, it's that curiosity, to be curious. There's going to be things that we don't like about ourselves or that we don't, either a behavior or the way we feel about some things or the way we react to some things, but to look at it with curiosity, with compassion. There's got to be a reason why I'm doing this. I don't like it. So let me go and get the help so I can figure it out and shift it.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give an example. Let's start on this example because we talked about the fragmented identity. And I think this might be a good example for everybody to understand. So there's, we'll call this woman Maria. There's a woman named Maria. We'll just call her that. and she's very successful at her job, but she feels this secret or this reoccurring shame whenever she relaxes. So she's really good at her work, but when she relaxes, she feels shame. Have you ever known people like that? I certainly have.
Yeah.
I remember
absolutely.
once being at my cousin's house, and she was such a hard worker that when we got to her house, she wouldn't relax. She kept moving things and cleaning, and I was like, what's going on here? Now I understand. Because as a child, this Maria that we're talking about, she was scolded for making any small mistakes. And she was actually labeled, Shirley, bad by a parent who said, you are a bad girl when you disobey. So how many people have heard that, right?
How common is that to label someone bad girl or bad boy or good girl or good boy?
Yeah. But a lot of parents, especially back in the day, they did. And
back in the day,
but for sure they did it. And so what Maria did in order to survive is she had to split off that frightened child part. And we'll explain split off that part, Shirley. But she became an overachiever. So an overachiever, she was competent at everything. She was controlled. And she was always proving to herself and to others how good she was. She was always good. Yeah. So this was in the past with Maria. So in the present moment, she's at a friend's house and she starts laughing at a friend's house. She's having a good time. And then suddenly she freezes up. She totally freezes up. And she starts judging herself internally. So think about that, judging herself internally. And she's literally thinking in her head, I shouldn't be this loud. I shouldn't be having fun. I'm selfish. So that old internal voice of the parents' condemnation of her, basically, it meets that child's hidden terror, actually. And she feels both pride in success, but then she feels this deep, irrational guilt.
Right. So that split, the adult who performs and the younger bad child who carries that shame and that fear is fragmented.
That's the fragmentation.
There's the fragmentation. The parts don't communicate. And many times the adult doesn't know that this fragmented part exists. We call that, Jung called it the shadow self. The adult dismisses the child's pain, the inner child's pain. The inner child keeps reenacting the same shame-based behaviors, self-sabotage, overworking, emotional withdrawal, not taking any time for self-care. How many times have I heard, well, I did something selfish the other day. I said no to going out because I wanted to stay home, and we label it in our society as selfish.
Right. And that's really called setting a boundary.
Absolutely. And taking care of the self. I said we need to include ourselves in the category we're very good at taking care of others, and we need to include ourselves in the taking care of others.
Right.
In therapy or a self-reflection practice, Maria intentionally invites the frightened child into awareness. And so that's part of the work, visualizing. I see you. I always have, the adult self have a conversation with the inner child. Who was labeled as bad, and taking care of her. What would she have needed? What would that little girl have needed if she got what she wanted when she was little, when a parent said something mean or frightening, and this allows the adult to validate the child's feelings, hearing the old internalized, condemnation, and gradually the two then can integrate.
It takes a while to do that too. Because if that was the message over and over and over, it's going to feel odd, just like it felt odd for me to be calm. It's going to feel odd to start healing that and not having that same reaction of guilt or shame because she's having a good time, or that she has to work to prove herself.
Because anything that is self-serving that she's doing for the self will feel like she's being bad.
Right. She'd be feeling bad because that would be her parents. That was the message she got if she didn't, do exactly what was needed to be done in the family, I suppose.
Right, exactly. There's all parts of ourselves that we fragment away, given maybe the messages that we got as children. And we'll go over that a little bit more so you can start to kind of sit with yourself and notice what message did you get and what part of yourself might you be fragmented.
That's so important, Shirley. So fragmentation is when parts of the self are exiled or split off, like the bad child. Okay, and so shadow work is that compassionate practice of reclaiming and integrating those parts so you stop being controlled by hidden shame.
Yeah.
And shame is a huge one on
Yeah.
earth that prevents you from moving forward.
Oh, yeah. It
Oh
is the
my
most
God.
painful emotion
Ah,
ever. And it's so interesting because I always, for a long time, I had the idea that shadow was like the what we consider the bad parts of ourselves, like being selfish or, but shadow can also be having needs. If we weren't allowed to have needs as a kid, that becomes the fragmented part.
yeah.
you know Wanting connection. I realized in my own work that was part of my shadow, the need for connection. I'm fine, I can do it all myself, I am fine, I'm the most independent person ever, and didn't realize that need for connection, because it was shamed, got fragmented away, and that was part of my shadow self.
Right.
Yeah. So to help with this, try this for 1 minute a day. Silently meet your inner child. And at the beginning, you're just meeting that younger part of you that we all feel inside, And if you don't even feel it, that's okay. Just sit with yourself and imagine a little girl, or a little boy. And offer one sentence reassurance, kind of like, I'm here now. I can take care of you. And just notice how your body feels. Yeah. Fragmentation is not a flaw, it's a protection. And shadow work is the path to bringing these parts home and integrating.
Yeah. And it's important to integrate those. So you can move forward on so many levels. If anything is holding you back. For me, Shirley, when you were talking about, you were always, and it's true, very fiercely independent. And then you started connecting. And that was a different feeling for you. And for me, I remember I was always about, responsibility. I mean, I write about it in my book. That was my big, it still almost overrides me. And I always have to remind myself constantly. I will remind myself at least once a day, go out and play, do something to have fun. And I even remember my mom, and today is 8 years that she passed away.
I know.
8 years today, God.
Today. Yeah.
And I remember she would say, Kelly, if it's the last thing I do, I'm going to teach you to have fun. You've got to go out and have fun. I mean, isn't that it's an odd sort of a twist, but that was always a thing for me.
Yeah.
Having to learn to do that. I have to pay attention to it. But anyway, over time, we don't just develop, we actually divide. And we become who we need to be in different environments.
Right, exactly.
So true. So the version of you at home may not be the version of you at school or in a relationship or at work.
And that doesn't mean that just because we act different in these different, environments, that we're fragmented. When we're integrated, we know. I mean, I'm not going to act like I act with you, Kelly, at work. Right. It's just, but there's more fluidity to it. There's a, you're integrated. You're not a completely different person. They're not, completely different people, but those divisions can create a sense of disconnection. They can create a sense of confusion, not feeling like yourself. Sometimes people say, I don't even know who I am. And that's not because they don't have an identity. It's because their identity has been split off across experiences. That's when it's more fragmented than just acting differently in different environments.
Right. And what's really happening is that there are different parts of you trying to lead at different times, maybe. The part of you that learned to be strong, like Shirley with you. I mean, that part of you was like, woof, it's like gangbusters, right?
Yeah.
And that part of you that learned to stay quiet, that's a big piece too. Right. And then there's that part of you that learned to please others. And that's the pleasing one. I remember when we were going to put Holiday in a private school back in the day in Los Angeles, and they said to us, it's my daughter, and they said, we need a negative. What can you say negative about her? And we thought, we couldn't figure one out. And then my mother said, Well, she's a pleaser. And I said to my mom, is that a bad thing? And she said, oh, yes. And I
Wow.
didn't realize it. I
Yeah.
really didn't realize it. A lot of people that are pleasers don't realize that, Shirley.
Yeah. Yeah. When you are such a pleaser that you abandon yourself.
Totally.
Now, there's nothing wrong with wanting to get along, wanting to please people, wanting to, sometimes you do, you put your needs aside for someone else's benefit, but it has to be balanced.
Right.
If pleasing yourself is part of that pleasing, then I would say it's very healthy. But if it's just about pleasing others, then your mom was absolutely right. I mean, your mom had infinite wisdom.
Yeah, she was a wise gal.
Yeah, she really was. Yeah.
And so, Shirley, without awareness, what happens?
Well, these parts can operate automatically, which creates an internal conflict. And that's what fragmentation feels like. And that's why sometimes you think, who am I, when you react to when we get triggered without noticing that we got triggered. And then we react a certain way. And we kind of think, who was that?
Right.
And it totally catches you off guard. And you're thinking, who did that? Why would? And then you start to feel bad about yourself. And so then it adds and it complicates things when we're not aware of it.
So you could get triggered, an unconscious trigger at work or in a relationship, or with a friend. And then you might literally say, what happened? What did I say that for?
Right.
What was I thinking? Where did it come from? And that's the piece you have to look at. That's the shadow side, everybody. You need to look at that. If it just, especially if it's a blurter, if it just blurts out.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And again, it's not about being angry at yourself. I mean, you can repair, own it, and then apologize if you did something, that hurt somebody, but then sit with it. Why would I react that way? And put yourself back in that moment that created that trigger. Right before the trigger, if you can stay in that moment, and more often than not, up will pop an image or a memory or something that might clue you in as to why whatever that was triggered you.
Yeah.
And why you reacted in that way.
Absolutely. And it may be a real childhood memory of 0 to 6, but it might be when you were 10 years old also. I mean, it could be anything that pops up.
It could be anything. Yeah.
Pops up. And so shadow work is really misunderstood. So when we talk about doing shadow work, again, what Shirley and I are talking about, looking at those fragmented pieces of things. Well, people tend to think it means going to darkness or focusing on negativity. No, that's not at all what it is. It's things that have been hidden, suppressed, repressed, any of that. And I'm here in the Midwest, and I say this a lot. On the West Coast, East Coast, I don't think anybody's too repressed. They just get it all out. Midwest, a lot of repression here.
Yeah. Wow.
A lot of people pleasing. And a lot of, it's okay. And then, what goes on? And then what happens? If you really don't work on these aspects, you may turn to drugs and alcohol.
Right, exactly. Because
it's a real shadow there.
Exactly, because it's there. These feelings are emotions. They don't just disappear because we decide to repress them or ignore them. They're there and they start to fester. And so they cause sometimes behaviors that we don't like. The shadow includes repressed emotions, disowned parts of ourselves.
Just explain disowned parts of themselves.
Well, if you weren't allowed to get angry, or if you got in trouble for getting angry, all of a sudden anger becomes this thing that I cannot. And so they push it to the side. Have you ever met people that are always in a good mood? Always in a good mood. And I'm not talking about somebody with, a sunny disposition and just where you can tell it overtly.
Yeah.
Those
like people, a Saturday Night Live skit.
Right. Exactly. Those people scare me the most.
Because
underneath there's anger. Because how can you, and under the umbrella of anger is frustration, annoyance, like somebody cuts me off. Okay, that's annoying. I'm not going to get completely angry at it. And if I do, I want to look at why. But emotions are natural responses. And so, for example, as you talked about the disowned parts, if anger was not okay and you got in trouble for being angry, you got shamed for being angry, little boys don't do that, or it gets pushed away. or if a parent was extremely angry and angry became extremely fearful, and I will never be like that parent. That gets fragmented away. And we don't feel it, but sometimes when something really deeply triggers it, it may show up in a blast, or we may do things that's kind of sometimes where passive aggressiveness shows up.
Totally.
You know,
Yeah.
when I'm never angry, you can do anything and I'm fine. You know, you showed up 30 minutes late. No, that's okay. I totally understand, that kind of thing. And then all of a sudden, you know, I do little things and I'm not even aware of it. You know, passive aggressive means it's something very passive, but it's very aggressive in nature. So I always talk about, you know, let me bake you a cake for your birthday. Oh, absolutely. And then I bake you a chocolate cake and you hate chocolate. Oh my God, I totally forgot. Sorry. You know, and then who's the jerk that says, well, but you know, I don't like chocolate. No, I completely forgot. And the cake that I've baked you is so elaborate that any kind of complaint makes you look like the jerk and not me.
Right.
Right.
We had that situation with carrot cake.
Did you?
We really did. Yeah.
Okay,
really
tell the
did.
carrot cake.
Well, for my daughter's 21st birthday, my mom said, I'm ordering the cake. And I said, okay, you can order the cake, but like, what are you going to order? She goes, I'm ordering a carrot cake. And I go, oh, she doesn't like carrot cake. Nobody likes carrot cake. She goes, she loves carrot cake. And I go, Mom, I'm telling you what, she does not like carrot cake. She goes, yes, she does. She told me that's her favorite. And I was like, what are you talking about? I'm like, okay, I just let it go. So the cake arrives and Holiday goes to me, carrot cake? And I go, she told me it was your favorite. She goes, it's not my favorite. It's her favorite.
Oh my God.
We had the same kind of an issue with Dawn. Poor Roseanne, Dawn's sister, made this delicious carrot cake. And she said, I was told it was your favorite cake. I don't know what it is about carrot cake.
That is, and that's your mom on the other side still working, you know, her, what she likes. Oh my God, that's hilarious.
I was like, carrot cake. I know my daughter. She doesn't like carrot cake. Nobody likes carrot cake.
And it's so funny because, I mean, we could see that as kind of a fragmented part where your mom always did for others.
Totally.
And I don't
she
know
wanted that cake.
And right. I don't know how easy it was for her to do for herself. And so knowing your mom very
that
well,
would be it.
Very unconscious that she would insist on, like, or even believe that she remembers Holiday saying that she likes carrot cake.
I was like, I know my daughter very well.
Yeah.
Carrot cake would never come up, but it's that same story. It's the you know, making of the cake, but
right.
It's so funny.
But you know, so the shadow also includes traits that were not accepted. You know, again, it could be anger. It could be you weren't allowed to feel sad.
Oh, yeah. Oh, you know, that's very true. Especially sometimes, and this has happened many times actually, where somebody passes away, a family member, and a young child's not allowed to show emotion. We're just going to go. Right. You know, and that's a big one.
That's a big one. That's a big one.
God.
You weren't allowed.
Can you imagine if you're an empath and you have a parent that says, you know, you don't go there, you know, buckle up.
Right. Exactly. I mean, that's so difficult. So then you tend to suppress all emotions, you know,
right.
And another one is you weren't allowed to set boundaries. You know, they even have now with kids, because parents are trying to be very, very cognizant where, you know, grandma's going to kiss you. And the kid says, I don't want to kiss. And so the daughter will say, Mom, she's not ready for a kiss, so please don't kiss. Whereas before, you were just shoved in. I remember, especially in Argentina, where everybody kisses and hugs, and the older people would just kiss. And I would just get so, because being avoidant attachment and an introvert, that would just, you know, and I couldn't say anything because they were older and you had to respect them. And
oh my God, yeah, kids are a little different now. They don't care that you're older. They don't care about that. They're just like, no, that's not right. I'm not going to do it.
Exactly. Which is wonderful. You know, many of these, you know, these shadow parts are rooted in shame.
Yeah.
You know, because as a little kid, when you get in trouble for having a natural reaction or a natural feeling, you're ashamed. You know, that feels very shameful when you get in trouble for it. So, and that feeling of shame, the brain or the self will do anything and everything to never feel that shame again, because it feels shame is not just what I did was not cool. You know, I don't want to use the word wrong. Shame is who I am. is not
Oh,
okay. So it's about the self. It's not about my behavior. That's why in parenting now they teach, I love you so much, but when you hit your sister, that's not okay. And so you're really pointing out the behavior, right? Not stop that. Don't do that.
right.
So that's why shame is so incredibly painful, because it has to do with who I am. It's I'm not okay.
So,
As a
Shirley, do you
human
have any
being.
examples of if somebody was shamed as an adult, how they would behave?
Well,
You know
they
what I'm
would.
thinking? Because shame is such a big one.
Yeah, yeah. Well, many times it's not sharing how they feel. The people that go along with everything, the people pleasers. It's never
So,
about
not being authentic.
not being authentic. I mean, for me, it was feeling guilty about taking up space in the world. I remember I used to drive on the freeway and go, God, the person behind me would be that much closer to their destination if I didn't exist.
Oh my
I mean,
God.
that is, that's deep shame, because
Wow, really?
there's something like you don't deserve at the extreme of it is you don't deserve to exist. There's
Oh,
something wrong with your existence.
wow.
Yeah. That's
Wow.
at the core of it. And of course it's on a continuum. And so there's different, it shows up maybe just a little bit of shame, asking for a need, you know,
Yeah.
all the way to that.
Wow. Wow. It's the parts of you that at some point felt like they weren't
Yeah.
allowed.
Yeah.
And so again, I want to talk about if you are too emotional or too sensitive,
You were told.
especially for those empaths out there that really could not contain that. They're too sensitive. They're too loud. You're too needy. That one. Like,
Right.
oh my God. So you learn to push that away.
And it's what's interesting, I learned in my neurobiology classes is there's no such thing as too sensitive. Sensitivity is one of the things that is inherited, that it's genetic.
Wow.
Isn't that
Wow.
interesting? So even if your parents didn't show, sensitivity,
Hmm.
that doesn't mean that you weren't sensitive. If you happen to be a very sensitive person, but
Wow.
it is one of the few things that is genetic. Not interesting.
That's amazing. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
So when something is pushed out of our awareness, it doesn't just disappear. Like I said a moment ago, it becomes unconscious,
Mm,
and it begins to influence our behavior from the background.
mm.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Without us
amazing.
realizing.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, that's why people say, I don't know why I reacted that way. Or they might say, because it wasn't, your conscious self. It's not your conscious self acting that. It was actually a part of you that's been waiting to be acknowledged here.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And so
It-
shame is one of the most powerful forces, Shirley, that we talked about in fragmentation, because it tells you that part of you is not okay, that this feeling is too much or this need is unacceptable. But once you believe that, you start to hide parts of yourself, even from yourself. And that's what
even
we were
from
talking about,
yourself.
even from yourself.
Yeah. And that's the piece that can be very tricky, because you're reacting in ways that someone, that your partner might go, why did you do that? And they don't even know, because it's also hidden from themselves, and actually maybe even deny it,
Right, right,
which can create a big problem. When something feels unacceptable, it gets pushed out of awareness, because again, it's about survival.
right.
But it doesn't disappear. It shows up in our triggers, in our patterns, in our emotional reactions, in our relationship dynamics. I think I might have shared this story that I have in the book. It's called the runny egg story. I think I shared it. So maybe, but I got triggered. I was at a restaurant. I told the waitress exactly how I like my eggs, because when they're runny, it grosses me out. And I must have repeated it 3 times. She goes, I dip into it and they're all runny. Now, so I asked her again. I go, just burn them. Just burn them. She comes back. They're still crystallized and not burnt and stuff. And so then I asked her again, and I handed it back to her. And I noticed inside of me, it feels like a volcano wants to explode.
Wow.
And I was just studying the somatic work.
Mhm.
And I thought to myself, okay, I mean, I know that my reaction was more that the situation, called for. And I don't like to call those overreactions, because while it's a reaction that is more than the situation calls for, I'm feeling it. So it's not an overreaction for me. So I sat with it. I imagined the volcano just exploding, exploding, exploding until that started to dissipate. And then all of a sudden up popped an image of me as a little kid in the dark, alone, and nobody seeing me and nobody listening to me.
Oh my
So
God.
what that triggered is not being heard.
Oh,
And that's why it triggered so much, because I kept telling her how I like the eggs and she kept bringing them wrong. Not because she wasn't hearing me, but because she had a whole bunch of other people she
so
was
let me
serving.
ask you something. If you had been, so 3 times you don't get the eggs right. What if you had gone, what's the matter with you? You didn't think to explode on that one? Because you said it felt like a volcano. And if you had, would that have been the shadow coming out?
Absolutely. That had been the shadow coming out. That was so, thankfully,
You
I
felt
knew
the
that.
shadow, but you didn't express the shadow.
Exactly. That's exactly right. I love the way that you're saying that.
Well, because I would have been furious.
Because in the past I have,
Yeah, I've been with you.
Right. But in this case, I kind of knew, I mean, I was very hurt. I said I wanted them. Well, I was like that. I wasn't friendly about it, but I didn't explode. And sometimes, yes, as much as I hate to admit it, I have. And not realizing that it triggers such a deep, deep wound of not feeling seen or heard.
Oh my God, Shirley. Yeah.
That to understand it in that way. And now, at times, that will still trigger me, but the trigger is it's like a tiny little, and I notice it. I know what it is right away.
Right.
So
you're conscious of it now.
Right. So it doesn't mean it doesn't like sting, and that's what doing your own work helps. You start to notice that maybe you get triggered less often. You start to notice that maybe your triggers aren't as intense. You start to notice that you get triggered, but there's no need to react to it.
And that's
you
the
take
truth.
care of yourself, right?
Yeah, that's the truth. If you do that work on yourself, then you risk less of getting mad at a situation.
And that's how we see progress. Progress isn't I'll never get triggered again. That really is setting yourself up to fail, because we are who we are. We've experienced what we've experienced, and the deep wounds are deep.
Right.
So we need to measure progress in how far we've come. Yeah. Not that we're triggered by those things or not.
Right. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Well, and often people don't even realize that the thing that they're trying to avoid is actually the thing that is asking to be healed.
Right. Yes, exactly. Avoidance reinforces fragmentation, because you're not giving it the voice, the validation, when I work with people with emotions, sometimes the emotion just wants to be named, just wants to be valid. I've said this many times. The neuroscientists have a saying, name it to tame it. When it gets named, it's almost like not only ourselves, like me as a little kid, needed to be seen, but our bodies, our minds, we need to see it in ourselves. And that can really help calm things down. And awareness is what begins integration.
Oh, totally. Shirley, what experience of the inner child would bring someone into a space, if you will, of being uncomfortable with other people's emotions or expressing emotions?
Well, a child that grew up in a family that didn't express emotions at all, certainly that would feel more as an adult like, oh, what's happening? I don't know what's happening. Tears are coming out and I'm not sure what's happening, or, you're having, I don't know what's going on with you, that kind of thing.
Right.
But if they got in trouble for expressing emotion, then the message is, then I got shamed for it. And the message is, emotions are not okay. You're not allowed to express emotions. And so then I push them very, very deep. Right. Third thing is parents who express a lot of emotions. Maybe a mother who was histrionic, and everything became a big deal, or a father or a mother that was very, very angry. So then emotions become kind of this scary, scary thing.
Oh my gosh. And Shirley, if there was a left brain parent, often would shame be expressed because they had to have a perfect child? Like, like a lot of left brain people would do that, like you've got to be perfect. Would
They
shame
can.
come from that?
Yeah, it depends on the dynamic. The child early on, even as an infant, they pick up on energy. And so the child early on realizes, oh, I can't express emotions. There's no room for my emotions here. So the child will hold back. And that's why many times it's unconscious, because we develop that survival adaptation so early on that we're not even aware of it. And it could be pre-verbal. If you realize there's no one's going to take care of your emotions, you shove them down very early on.
God, oh my gosh. And then that could lead, if you're shoving your emotions down, to overweight. And there could be shame around that.
Yeah.
And there could be, unexpressed things. And there could be, there's so many things that happen from that get put into a fragmented place.
Right. Exactly. When we have to fragment parts of ourselves as part of our survival.
Right.
No good comes of that. And it shows up in our adult. And sometimes it even shows up in physical ailments.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
They've done a lot of research where diabetes or autoimmune diseases have been tied back to unhealed trauma.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's interesting because this show is about awareness. And I think, Shirley, that the work that we do is really to give people tools for awareness.
Yeah.
The more aware you are, the more healing can come out, the more you're, move forward, with ease or easier.
Right.
So the question really becomes, again, what part of you has been left behind? What part of you learned to stay quiet? And what parts of you still need to be seen? Because healing isn't about becoming someone new. All right. It's really about returning to all of who you are.
Right. Your authentic self. And getting to know who your authentic self is. You may not even know who that is, starting to meet your authentic self.
And that's why we come to Earth, really, to know thyself. Who are we? This is what happened when I was young. And you start to have memories, and you start to, to clear things up. And doing shadow work, I think, is really important. And inner child work is so important.
Absolutely.
For that integration of who you are.
Absolutely. Healing is not about removing parts. It's about integrating them, bringing them back into awareness with compassion, not judgment, because we all have the capacity to feel anger. And if we can, if that's part of our shadow, we're not allowed to feel anger. And so anger is pushed away. Anger is, like Dr. Peter Levine always says, anger is life force energy. If we weren't in touch with life force energy, a lot of people who are people pleasers are not in touch with their anger. And the species wouldn't have survived if somebody crossed my boundary and as a tribe, we didn't do this, we would have gotten killed.
Oh,
so anger is a very, very, and it's connects us with life force. When that is suppressed, we see a lot of issues.
Well, Shirley, let me ask you this. With IBS, because so many people have IBS, everybody seems to have trauma with it. What are your thoughts on that?
You mean gastrointestinal issues?
Yes, yeah.
Well, because we hold everything in our body, and when as an example, the way that it was described to me, there's times when the sympathetic nervous system comes online when we're active, when we have to, and so what happens is all the blood goes to the big muscles, because we're active, we're walking, we're and in the Neanderthal days, if a threat came to us, we had to be ready to punch, and the blood needed to already be there so we can react right away. And then there should be times of rest and relaxation, and that's when the parasympathetic nervous system comes online. And so that's when your body is calm enough. So now all the blood goes away from the big muscles and goes into the intestinal, goes into your digestion. So now you can digest and you can rest and that kind of thing. Well, when you feel, when your childhood is chaotic and you feel there's a lot of danger, well, who gives a shit about digesting the sandwich? I need to be prepared to fight or flight to save my life. And so you're stuck in this kind of sympathetic fight or flight place, or even freeze, but that freezes the whole system. And years of living like that starts to affect your digestion, because your digestion, you you haven't felt safe enough and rested enough to allow the digestion to happen naturally. And so it starts to just mess it up. The body gets used to the frozen, and so the food doesn't digest as well.
So somebody with IBS, then, would it help them to do inner child work?
Oh gosh, yes, absolutely, absolutely. Because inner child work is associated with trauma work.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah. You're right, it is. Yeah. Wow. And when you do all of this, you don't lose control. You actually gain understanding, which is everything.
Oh, absolutely. And understanding creates choice. When we can pull things from the unconscious into conscious awareness, that now gives us a choice. We're not on what I call emotional autopilot, where something happens, we react. Something happens, and we don't even know why we're reacting, as we've talked about. When our shadow parts, our fragmented parts, come into a conscious awareness, now we have a choice. So like when I go and I'm calm and relaxed, when I go to a restaurant and they don't, I have a choice. Okay, I know this is triggering to me. It's not that she or he's not seeing me. How do I want to respond to this?
It's not that they're not seeing you. They might be busy. Who knows? Somebody got fired. They're having their own bad day, whatever.
Right.
And then how do you want to respond?
Who do I want to be in the world? How do I want to respond? Your mom, and I think you have it in your office, your mom had this wonderful plaque that said, character is who you are when someone's not looking.
So true.
So who do I want to be in the world? What kind of person do I want to be? And that's not always easy, because we get triggered, but the more we're aware of it, the more choices we have.
Yeah. Awareness is everything.
Oh, yeah.
But it gives a shift of consciousness.
Absolutely. Your mom said awareness doesn't make the change, but awareness is the first step to change.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to be doing a show on that. I mean, awareness is great, but it's the beginning. It's the key to open up a lot of doors here, is to have the awareness. Then you've got to be brave enough to move forward with it, and set those boundaries. Might feel uncomfortable, but just do it. So you don't have to go digging into the past to begin. Okay. You can start with what's happening right now, because your present reactions, this is the best, are reflections of your past experiences. So here are some simple entry points. And we've talked about this before, but pay attention. What triggers you? Like, is it runny eggs? What triggers you? Is it carrot cake? What triggers you? What feels disproportionate? Because that's a big thing. Like the eggs, like if that had been me, Shirley, and I didn't want the runny eggs, I probably would have just exploded. You handled it a little differently, but either way, it was the shadow. The shadow knows, what situations feel familiar, even when they're different. So that's something to look at. And most importantly, what part of you is reacting?
Yeah. That curiosity is what begins the process of integration. Because the moment that you pause and you ask, where is this coming from? What just happened? You shift from reaction to awareness.
And it's that exact moment, Shirley. If you can do that. I had an experience today I had set so many boundaries that today somebody was trying to push my boundary, and I was so great. It didn't even faze me. I just kept going. It was like, okay. I didn't even feel it. It was like, okay.
I know when you said to me, I'm not even triggered. And that sometimes, that will help us when we have an experience that used to trigger us. That helps us really know where we're at, how much work we've done, and, where we're going, is to realize, wow, in the past, this would have really triggered me. And now I'm not feeling it, or I'm not upset. It's annoying.
It's annoying, but I will tell you, everybody can get to that place.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Everybody can get to that place, because awareness is really where healing begins. That is. And I think something really important to add here too is that people often want to fix themselves, but this isn't about fixing. This is about understanding. You're not broken. A lot of things happen. A lot of parts fragmented. Come on, we can pull them back together and put it together the way you're authentically supposed to be. And you did choose to be here on earth at this time period.
Right. Yeah. When people try to fix themselves, they often bypass the very parts that need attention. And it's also, languaging is so important. Fix myself carries with it I'm wrong, I'm bad, all the old messages.
Right.
Where understand myself
Yeah.
is the message of I'm okay. I just want to better understand myself.
Right, because surely those parts do not go away. What happens is they get louder. The next time with the eggs, it could have been the steak was rare and I wanted it well. I mean, and then really a blow up situation.
Exactly. They get louder and they show up in different ways. Anxiety, avoidance, emotional overwhelm.
Oh, that's
not taking care of ourselves, always doing for others. I mean, they will show up. They don't just go away.
Right, right. So instead of asking, how do I stop this? Start asking, what is this gift trying to show me?
Yes.
So you're not just who you are today. You are every version of yourself that has ever existed. You're still asking to be seen. You're still asking to be understood. And when you begin to listen, you begin to come home to yourself. And that's everything. It's everything coming home to yourself.
Absolutely. When those parts are acknowledged, they no longer need to fight for your attention, because they will. We have, one of my teachers would say, our psyches are like a plant that will twist towards the sunlight, and our psyches twist towards healing, so those parts will not, again, they won't need to fight for your attention because you'll be acknowledging them. Integration brings stability, it brings clarity and wholeness.
Oh my gosh. Thank you, Shirley. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today on Psychology and the Soul, where psychology and spirituality are no longer separate and wholeness becomes possible. And before we go, I want to mention something for next week on April 14th, next Tuesday. We're really stepping into a deeply important and meaningful conversation. And this one is we're going to be talking about autism. If you know anybody with autism, if you believe you have autism, please join us, because we are honored to be joined by a very special guest. And that guest is Prajna Avalon, who's a wonderful healer who was diagnosed with autism about, I guess it's been three or 4 years now. And she's going to help us explore this topic with depth and love and understanding and perspective and compassion. And she's, how brilliant she is. She's
she's incredible. She's a brilliant healer, but also, and when, she would tell me, she goes, oh my God, the diagnoses, it wasn't a label. I started to make sense. Yes. I made so much, because she didn't know why she would react certain ways or why. Yeah. And she started to make sense to herself. And that is the gift.
Right on. So you guys don't want to miss this one. And we'll see you next time. See you next week. And I'll see you on my Thursday show, Ask Me Anything. So Shirley, it was great to be with you again tonight. And
great to be with you. I love it. All right. See everybody next week.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you for joining us.